Amendments were tabled in Parliament earlier this month to extend protection under the Children and Young Persons Act. It proposes that the age to be recognized as a child under the Act be raised from 16 years old to 18 years old.
The Youth Court will also have expanded jurisdiction to hear cases of offenders who are below 18, the default for most youth offenders. Now, we're going to discuss this further and the reasoning behind these proposed changes with Ms. Ang Bee Lian, Director of Social Welfare at the Ministry of Social and Family Development. Ms. Ang, thank you so much for coming in. Now, firstly, what's behind these amendments, and why are they so necessary now?
I think the Children and Young Persons Act is always amended to make sure that it is relevant to our times. So, for example, in the current one, we take cognizance, for example, of the new media, the influence. And we also have, for example, some gag orders today to ensure that actually we continue to keep the space and the environment where we help with the families to really mend relationships, for children to actually be rehabilitated, to be really safe, away from really public scrutiny, and also to really keep the identity of the children and young persons really anonymous. Because I think the children are still very young, the young persons are very young. There's a long way for them, and they really need to be able to feel safe to do that work.
And I suppose with the rise of social media and how sort of prevalent that has become, that is one of the reasons behind this, right?
There are several reasons. We also do extensive consultation with stakeholders because it's an ongoing process. So we work with the courts, we work with the government agencies to make sure that the law actually supports the work that we do. Because at the end of the day, the key primary driving force is really we want to make sure that we can care well for children, protect them well, where the families actually need help. We can also bring help very readily to the families. We also need to recognize that there are some families that are harder to reach. And for some of these families, we really want the community to also come alongside us so that we can actually reach these families to get help. Not every family actually wants to receive help. So where they are more difficult to reach, we really need the community to come along. And the amendments actually take care of some of these things. We have built some amendments to actually help us to work better with volunteers so that they actually complement us in the work that we do. So we want to have a whole community, a whole village to really help these children.
Right. So how big of an issue is, of neglected children in Singapore then?
I think regardless of the size of any issue, I think what's important is every child, every young person is so important in Singapore. And we always want to focus on the needs of the children. And the other thing we need to realize is actually for neglect, it's a very gradual process. And because it's so gradual, we really need the community to help us also with the surveillance, to keep an eye, to really be that neighborliness, so that we can actually be alerted where families need help, so that the help can really reach these families very readily and speedily. And for some of these families, they really need professional help. But we do need an alert system. So for neglected families, gradual process, but we need the community to come in.
Well, one child being neglected is one too many, I'm sure you'd agree, but just to give us an understanding or a sense of how big a problem is this, is there any indication of...
Has it been increasing through the years?
Yes.
I think in terms of numbers, because Singapore has become bigger, of course in terms of numbers it's become larger. But I think in terms of prevalence, I don't think so. I think what has actually happened is that because we are now more active at the ground, cases are surfacing more as well. So I think that's a bit of a good news. But we want the community to continue to do that because I think the earlier we actually move in, even before any bigger issues happen, we want to be there already because I think children have only very short time, very, very short years. And the earlier we bring in the help, the better is going to be the outcome. So we really want to do that, and we intervene quite actively now, work very closely, for example, with childcare centers so that the alert systems come to us very readily, not just at the school level, but at the preschool level.
So how did MSF actually decide on the amendments to make, though? I mean, what did you all see that, required, amendments? Because you say that, it changes with times. So were there anything specific, like, for instance, digital media, that's obviously something new. But were there other things that prompted MSF to make these amendments?
The Children and Young Persons Act is a very, very old act. But it's been actively being amended. So it's a regular process. We keep observing, gather insights so that we can continue to do the improvements. And the improvements largely are clustered into about 4 areas that we always look at. One is actually how can we help families better. The other one is how do we help foster families better. Because some children are living away from their families. And when they live away with their families and are with foster parents, we want the foster parents to be able to make decisions of daily living. For example, health appointments, medical appointments, even decisions about giving children enrichment classes. And now with the amendment to the Act, we've actually empowered foster parents to make those decisions. Whereas in the past, you have to look for the natural parents, and they're not always readily available or contactable. So we've actually speeded up a lot of these processes. The other thing that's important is we then now can actually plan long-term for many of these children so that they can be in a stable environment. Whereas last time, sometimes the children are in shorter-term care, and really it doesn't provide a stability for children. So that's part of the amendment as well.
Yeah, well, indeed, as you say, that it takes a whole village to raise a child, and thank you so much for coming in and, speaking to us on this issue. We've been speaking with Ms. Ang Bee Lian, and we've just heard from Senior Director and Director of Social Welfare at the Ministry of Social and Family Development.